Yep. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Greater Rochester Teen Book Festival. I'm Cara Fuentes, a student from Mexico, and this panel is called Couple Goals, Writing with Your Partner. Before I introduce you to our wonderful authors, here are a few reminders. First, if you have a question for any of the authors, please leave it in the chat. Second, please remain muted for the whole session. And third, remember that this session is being recorded. Now, we are very excited to introduce a couple of authors. First, welcome Morgan Baden, who is an established best-selling ghostwriter. She has also taught courses at the New York University Center for Publishing. And we also have Barry, who has published 24 novels of various genres and graduated from Yale with a degree in English. The two are married and live in New Jersey with their daughter and son.
All right,
Hello,
thank
everybody.
you so much. All right, so welcome everyone, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. So was there anything you guys wanted to say before we go into questions?
Thanks
Sure.
for having us here. I mean,
thank
we're
you.
thrilled. You know, we were supposed to be at the show last year, and then something happened. I can't remember what, but it just didn't happen. And so we're really glad to be here. We're happy to be here. Rochester's great.
Barry has been to Rochester a bunch of times, but it's my first time. So thank you for welcoming me. And just to clarify too, we co-wrote The Hive together, which was, the first creative partnership we had, unless you count our marriage and 2 kids, which does involve some creativity, certainly. Yeah, so we're happy to be here and take questions and talk about what it's like to write as a couple or co-write with someone or collaborate with someone, whether you're married to them or not.
So on the subject of creativity, how do you settle creative differences?
I'm always right.
Rock, paper, scissors worked really well for us.
We wrote the whole book with dice. We just rolled dice. Yeah.
No, I mean, with The Hive in particular, it's a bit of a different story in terms of how we got to the topic of the book and the plot of the book, which is that the concept of The Hive was actually developed by Jennifer Beals, the actress, and her producing partner, Tom Jacobson. They came up with the concept for The Hive. And it's a really funny story because Jennifer's daughter is a huge fan of Barry's work. And when they sold the concept to the publisher, they said, we want to get someone like Barry Lyga to write the book. And they said, why not ask Barry Lyga? And they were like, oh, can we do that? It was this very funny situation. And Barry, if you want to talk about why. Yeah.
I mean, I normally don't work that way. I normally don't let somebody else give me a story and then I write it. I mean, even when I wrote the Flash books or when I wrote Thanos, the studios in those cases didn't say, here's the story. They just said, here's the character. And I came up with the story. So this was a weird situation where they had the story already, mapped out. They had like a 10, 15 page outline, I think. But it was Jennifer Beals and I was like, all right, I'll consider this. And so I looked at it and I thought it was interesting, but at the time, our son had just been born. And on top of that, I was writing like 3 books at once, I think. It was crazy. It was something insane.
Like all our deadlines too.
Yeah. So, I looked at it and I liked the idea. And The Hive is about social media. And I'm on social media, but I'm not an expert at all. And I realized it'd be a lot of work for me to do the research I would need to do. And then I looked over at on the sofa next to me, and there's Morgan, who is a best-selling ghostwriter and also a social media expert. And I thought, I don't have time to write this book, but I have time to write half of this book. And we had always talked, we're both writers. We'd always talked about collaborating someday. And I said, yeah, you just had a baby. This is a really good time for us to dive into something together.
Looking for something to do, right?
Right, exactly. I mean,
time, yeah.
Maternity leave is just vacation time.
Right.
so I said, do you want to write this together? And she was like, yeah. So I talked to Jennifer and talked to the publisher and said, look, if you want me, you got me, but she's coming too, and we're going to do this together. And they were like, oh, that's great. And so we sat down and we looked at the outline, and there were things we liked and things we didn't like and things that had to change, blah, blah, blah. We talked to Tom and Jennifer and said, here's the stuff we want to change. So, I mean, this was really a collaboration between 4 people. It wasn't just us. Tom and Jennifer, gave us feedback and all that, and were delightful to work with. There was no ego at all. I was worried, when we said, oh, like, we don't like this element. We want to get rid of that and replace it with something else. And they were like, okay, you know what you're doing. Go ahead, do it. So that was good. But that's how the story came about. It was really just a confluence of a bunch of different things, coming together.
And we really did, you talk about a partnership. So it's a true collaboration between me and Barry, but it was also a true collaboration between the 4 of us. The really cool thing, I think, was this idea of whenever it came to a part in the story where maybe we had differing thoughts on how to execute that or what should happen next or whatnot, it was really nice to just sort of wander into his office at night after the kids had gone to bed and be like, hey, let's spend 10 minutes talking about this angle, and then really, going through it and landing on the best decision for what we were trying to get across in the story. And there were some moments that we disagreed, for sure.
Yeah. I think one of the best things, though, was that whenever there was something that one of us was having trouble with, there was somebody else to hand it off to. Mm-hmm. Oh, this scene is about these 2 characters, and I don't have a grip on that, so you take that. And this scene is about this.
I have to tell
you can tell the story.
So I launched and led at the time social media for Scholastic. That was my day job. But Barry has always been super technical. He's like an Apple geek. He knows everything. He sets up Wi-Fi for my family members.
I've got wire strippers on my desk.
So there was definitely and throughout the Hive, again, it's a book centered on social media gone wrong, sort of set in the day after tomorrow.
Does it ever go right?
Yeah. And so there were some moments where, it's not technical. You don't need an advanced degree in engineering to read it, but there are definitely elements where someone who understands like the network behind a social media platform you need to have that knowledge to write that kind of scene, right? So there would be times where if I came across a scene that I was writing where there was a conversation between 2 characters that needed to have some technical element, I would flag it and say, insert technology language here, and hand that section over to Barry, right? But my favorite is that Barry, once I was reading his pages, we sort of alternated chapters and then would swap them and redo them. And I was reading his pages and he had flagged in capital letters, insert something cute here. I don't know. What do couples do?
It was something like, there are these 2 characters having a moment. And I was like, and I was tired, and I'm like, I just can't be bothered. And I'm like, what do they do? What do human beings do in this situation? And I gave it to her. Because I was like, I don't know, should they hold hands? I can't be bothered. So I gave it to her. Yeah. Yeah. But go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask another question. But
I think my favorite thing in terms of like resolving creative issues, there was a particular character in the book that I sort of took ownership of, and I did most of the development work on that character. And I got to a point where I was reading through some pages Morgan had written, and in one paragraph, she completely like knocked this guy off his pedestal, changed his relationship to the story, like this whole, and I'm looking, and she didn't tell me she was going to do this. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, hell no. No, like, are you kidding me? This is my character. And you're no. And I was furious. I was so angry. And I'm like, I'm just going to delete this paragraph, because once this paragraph goes away, everything else is fine. And then I thought about it, like, it's a collaboration. I should really let her have her say. So I didn't delete the paragraph. And honestly, like, I think the book is so much stronger for it. But the punchline to all this, the thing that I love, is when we turned the book into our editor and she gave it back to us, she flagged that paragraph and said, I don't know if this is necessary, cut. And Morgan was like, okay. And I'm like, no, we are keeping that damn paragraph. We are keeping that. It's important. So, I mean, in a way, I ended up having my way with that character after all. But it was just one of those things where that was an example where, you know, she did something that I was like entirely against and horrified by, but came around to her way of thinking.
And I think that's the cool part of collaborating, is that your partner can surprise you.
Yeah.
Within the narrative when you don't expect it. And that's a really cool bonus that happens when you collaborate with someone.
We had all kinds of issues with Trump in the book, because I wrote the president and we didn't name him, but I wrote him as Trump. And
keeping in mind, we wrote this book the fall of 2017.
Yeah, we wrote this book in the fall of 2017. Yeah. And we got a lot of pushback on that from a lot of people at the publisher and everything. And Morgan was like, does it really matter? Like, just change it, blah, blah. And I was like, no. And I stuck to my guns.
Only dial it back a bit. Yeah. Try and
but then she
a compromise.
But then after listening to the editor and the publisher and everybody else yell at me about it, Morgan, we turned off the conference call. Morgan looked at me and said, no, you're right. Leave it that way. So, yeah.
So now that you guys have collaborated on a book, how has your writing process changed after working with a partner?
Ooh,
that's a cool question.
That's a really good question.
Well, I mean, partnered before with Peter Facinelli and
Rob DeFranco.
Rob DeFranco. I knew it was Rob. I couldn't remember his last name. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, look, at this point in my career, like The Hive was like my 22nd book or something like that. Like I was pretty well set in terms of how I write. I'll say that, you know, there are times I'm working on something and I wish I had somebody I could hand a piece off to. I think it has probably made me a little more open, to hearing other opinions of my work. I'm very much, pretty hardcore about, no, this is my book, this is my vision, don't tell me what to do. Working on the book with Morgan has made it a little easier for me to hear those other voices. Whether I listen or not is something else entirely, but it's made it easier to hear them, at least.
And I would say from my end, you know, ghostwriting in particular, which is how I started my writing career formally, if you're not talking about my day job in writing, is a huge collaboration, right? So I would be given a 25-page summary of the story of the book.
Wow. And
then I had to expand that into a 60,000-word novel. And there's a lot of back and forth involved in that, right? So it's just collaborative by nature. So for me, doing this with Barry felt pretty normal anyway. And I would say too, the good thing for someone like me is that when you are, you know how they say when you're like a tennis player, you always want to be the worst tennis player on the team so that you're always playing with someone better than you so that you're learning. I feel that way about writing too. So it was really amazing. Like Barry's my husband. Obviously, I know him. I know what he's capable of when it comes to his work, but to then actually be sort of in the trenches with him and seeing his process was really fascinating. I know. Well, and I think that's actually a key right there, is that I think for a lot of writers, it is, let me sit down and map out this entire book chapter by chapter, and then I will spend, an hour a day working on it until it's done in 4 months or whatever. And Barry's process is very different. He works out all of the plot problems in his brain before his hands even touch the keyboard. And that's not how I operate. So watching that taught me a lot about trusting your sort of innate storytelling gifts, if you have them. But B, also just like seeing how, when you get stuck in a plot or in a character or whatever, I don't know, watching Barry solve those kinds of problems really helped me with my future books. So it's just a really cool process.
I think one of the things I remember, if you don't mind, I remember at some point in the book, we had this outline that Jennifer and Tom had given us, and we were going to do some of it and we weren't going to do other parts of it, but we had agreed, yeah, we'll do this, we won't do that. And I remember at one point we were working on something or other, and we were talking it out, and you said, oh, but if we do this, how are we going to hit this mark later? And I said, don't worry about it. We'll either figure it out or we'll change it. And you were like, what? Like, can you do that? Like, can you change it like that? And I was like, what matters is what we've got working right now is really good. So let's go with that. And if it fits into the rest of the plan, great. If it doesn't, we're going to change the plan because this is really good. And I think that was, that to me is like the one thing I know where I was like, oh, that was kind of cool. Like that might've been helpful. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of a follow-up question to writing styles. Do you ever change your style of writing so that the two styles kind of mesh better together?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to sort of, I will say this, one of the coolest parts after The Hive came out was when someone said to us, it was Barry's mom, who obviously knows us both, and she read it and said there were lines that I was trying to figure out who wrote them. And we looked at those lines and we were like, we have no idea who wrote these.
Right. Yeah, there was a particular sentence where she's like, I really love this. Which one of you wrote that? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea who wrote. Like, I mean, technically, I could probably go back through all the drafts and find the track changes somewhere. But I think the cool thing about the book, and I think it's amazing, is that because we're very different sorts of writers, is when you look at it, you really can't tell who wrote what. It doesn't feel like, it feels very smooth. And I think in part that's because we started out, she wrote a series of chapters, I wrote a series of chapters, and then we started like breaking it out by scene. She would write a scene, I would write a scene. And then we started swapping pages, and we would each tweak those pages and then pass them back and tweak them again. And it got to the point where, I mean, there are places in that book where there could be a sentence that neither one of us wrote that entire sentence.
Right.
One of us wrote it, another one massaged it, then the other one came back and massaged it again. So you can't tell anymore who wrote what. I mean, there are some things where I know, oh, I definitely wrote that, she definitely wrote that. But that stuff doesn't jump out, and you'd have to be one of us to know those things. So yeah, I mean, I don't remember deliberately trying to change how I was writing. And I don't know if you did, Mark, but I just know that because we kept passing it back and forth so many times, it just became this mix of both of us, this nice, blend of both, much like our children, a nice blend of both of us.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, where, and I would say too, our goal was to make sure that no one reading this book would say, wow, those two chapters sound like they came from two different authors. Like that is the opposite of what we wanted. So, so whether consciously or subconsciously, I think we were both micro adjusting parts of our writing so that they would be a little bit more seamless on the page.
Yep.
Okay, so changing tracks a little bit. We talked a lot about, your kind of creative process and all that, but how do you handle dividing time between work versus personal life in a way that still allows the process to be creative?
When you figure that out, tell me.
If someone has the playbook on that, please, we will buy it from you, because we want that. No, I mean, I think that the trick is that there is no one answer, and that honestly, the answer for each person changes constantly as well. I think with every book, you're a different writer, just like with every year, you're a slightly different person, right? And so what worked for me writing this book in fall of 2017 would absolutely not work for me right now if we were to collaborate on something else again. But it's funny, when I think back to writing this book, Barry was on the Thanos deadline. And so I started writing the first, 3 chapters of The Hive, I think. And again, I was working at Scholastic at the time in Soho, and so had to commute by train every day. And I would literally just open up my laptop and write. My goal was 2,000 words a day on the train. So into the city and out of the city, I was writing on my commute, and then working a full day, and then coming home to 2 little kids, and then putting them to bed, and then sitting down with Barry and being like, okay, let's go over today's pages and move on. And so, you know, that's a recipe for burnout, right? Certainly creative burnout. And I think I really felt that once we turned in the book. It felt like I had to, like I crashed against a wall, and then I could not produce words for a couple of months. Like I was just tapped out of words because my day job is writing heavy too. So, but I think, you know, it really does change for everyone on a regular basis. And so I think at the end of the day, what really matters is making sure that you feel connected to whatever work it is that you're doing so that you want to do it. So, you know, and I always think of writers who say like, I write 5,000 words a day, or I write 10,000 words a day, or I don't write every day, but I write every month and blah, blah, blah. That's great. I think if you're a writer and you can put some kind of parameter around what you're seeking to accomplish each week or each month or whatever, that's really helpful. I do that. I have a physical planner, and I like to write down each week my, you know, not just work stuff, but also like personal stuff. So my goal this week is to at least, you know, do X, Y, Z on this manuscript or whatever. And so it's just you know, for me, that's what's helpful, is like visualizing what I want to get done at the end of a week or a month, so that then I can reverse engineer and actually do the work on time. But Barry's very different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the difference too is that this is my job.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that especially when we were writing The Hive, I was also writing Thanos, and I was working on a Flash book, and I feel like there was something else in there. There might have been 2 Flash books. Anyway, I was doing a lot. Like I you know, this time period was a really difficult time period, and I definitely burned myself out. I wrote something like 4 or 5 books over the course of 12 months, which, like, obviously I was capable of doing it, but it was kind of crazy. You know, I keep coming back to Stephen King's story, which is that he wrote into the attic of his house, and he had this massive desk that he wrote out. It was this huge old desk, and, you know, all this stuff piled on and everything. And then when he had his accident, when he was hit by that van back in like 97, I guess, and almost died, when he finally came out of the hospital and came back home, he found his wife had cleared out the attic and just left this little tiny desk there for him. And that the point was, you know, this desk was consuming your life the way writing was consuming your life. And you need a smaller desk. And he said something like, art is a support system for life. Life is not a support system for art. And I try to remember that, because I definitely have a tendency to be like, all that matters is the words I leave behind. You know, I definitely have that tendency. And it's one thing to do that when you're younger, when you're not married, when you don't have kids, when you have no responsibilities. But when you're married, when you have children, like you've got to break out of that rut, because you can't do that. You can't live that way. You know, when I did that year where I wrote 5 books or whatever, like I wrecked my health, like mentally and physically. And, you know, I mean, I got to admit, I look back and I'm like, damn, I did it. You know, like I wrote 5 really good books in a year. And I'm like, yeah, but there was a cost to it. And so you have to remember that. You have to keep your writing desk small.
That's an amazing analogy. I don't think I've ever heard that story before.
I also am amazed. Like, if I were in the hospital for a while and came back and Morgan had touched my office, I would be like, what did you do? Where's my stuff?
That is a bold move for sure.
I mean, I guess, but it worked.
It worked. Yeah, it worked.
Wow. Okay. So, kind of a follow-up question. But do you ever need to get away from the other person while you're writing?
No, I want to be glued to his side for all eternity.
Well, let's put it this way. We had 2 options for doing this panel. We could have been sitting next to each other, or Morgan could be up on the 4th floor and I'm down on the 1st floor. So you tell me.
That answers the question.
No, I will say, I think when you're in a writing partnership, obviously, you know, there's a writing partnership, and then there's a writing partnership that is also a marriage, or a marriage that is also a writing partnership. And but I think it is absolutely imperative that if you are writing with a romantic partner, that you build in time during which you are not talking about writing. And that's really tough to do. But we would go out to dinner and be like, okay, if we talk about writing, then this meal is a tax write-off, right? Because we've been talking about work. But is that the smartest move to make for our relationship right now?
and it's tough because we both love writing. Like, right. It's not like it's a chore. Like, we both love talking about writing. I mean, it's something that we both love. It does remind me, I remember, we were about halfway through the book and we sent what we had written to Tom and Jennifer just to get their read on where we were taking things. And, if you want to course correct, you don't want to have to do it at the end. Yeah. It's better to do it halfway through. So we sent it to them and we had a conference call with them. We're chatting with them. And they said something like, so you guys are okay? And we're like, yeah. And Tom was like, we were kind of worried that we were going to lead you guys to get divorced over this. And I remember I said, dude, the only thing we don't fight about is the book. We're fine with the book. So, yeah, no, when you're, in a way, this is going to sound strange. In a way, I feel like writing this book was good practice for COVID for us.
Okay.
Because we were up in each other's grills constantly, because it was like the kids, the house, dinner, shopping, and work. Like, everything we did, we had to be together all the time. And then, lockdown, and guess what? We're in each other's faces all the time again. And so in a way, it was like a dry run for us.
So you mentioned that you sent about halfway through the manuscript off to your other kind of collaborators, Tom and Jennifer. So can you just talk a little bit about kind of how else that relationship, really worked? Because you mentioned that they are collaborators. They came up with the idea, whatever. So,
yeah. I mean, I have to say, first of all, when they gave us feedback, I was always impressed by how thoughtful it was and how, well, obviously, so they are Hollywood people, right? So they are experts at understanding how to tell a story that moves audiences in a pretty quick fashion, right? Like they were really good at the pacing and at the action and all that. From my perspective, that was always incredibly helpful. I'm the type of writer that wants to spend 4 pages talking about the color of the walls in the room, right? So that was always a really nice reminder to me of like, no, you got to move the action forward, right? So talking to them always helped in that perspective. And I also think, they are the ones who came up with the core of the concept. So of course they had really thoughtful opinions about it. And I think too, like, we all had a shared mission of making this the best book it could be, about this story. And so I think understanding that everyone was 4 people is a lot, right? That's a lot of people to collaborate. But understanding that we all had a shared mission and that we all brought something unique to the table, I think led to this really respectful, exciting relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said before, the great thing about them was that they did not bring their egos to the table at all, and I think they had an understanding. There's a reason why they needed a writer. It was because they couldn't write it. If it was a screenplay, that would be one thing, but a novel has different needs from a screenplay, and I think that they understood that we knew what would make a good book as opposed to a good movie. And they trusted us to do those things. And when we first said to them, okay, look, you've got this character sort of being this way. We think she would be more like this. And they were like, okay. And, no complaint at all. I remember Morgan was the one who took one look at the treatment and said, the main character should be a person of color. And she should be biracial, which completely transfigured how we wrote the book, obviously.
And Jennifer's biracial, which is obviously why that was important to her and to us. But also I would say too, I remember looking at the treatment and thinking, this is a very male heavy story. Like the main character, at least in the treatment, I believe, and her mom were the only women. And I was like, that's not what I want to write here. So, so we changed one of the other characters. And I also think too, maybe not quite related to this question, but I think we built a lot more backstory around Cassie as the main character, around Cassie's family, that is necessary to hit those emotional moments that were not necessarily, maybe wouldn't have been reflected on screen in the way that they needed to be in the book.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that a book can do that a movie can't. You can really dive into backstory. You can dive into sort of the interior world. There's ways to do that in film, but it's not as visceral. It's not as immediate, and you can't go as deep because there's no time. Whereas in a book, it's another paragraph, you know, and you can do that. And they really understood that and did not have a problem with any of that. So really, you know, like Morgan said, I mean, their comments were always thoughtful. I would say respectful. I mean, it seemed like they really understood what we were trying to accomplish. And it was really nice working with them.
I think there was just a lot of trust all around.
Yeah, that's the perfect word. Yeah.
So, if you could collaborate with any author that you haven't already collaborated with, who would it be and why?
Oh my goodness.
And I'll give you a minute to think about it if you haven't.
Oh my God, I've got so many.
Well, you have to choose one.
I know. And the funny thing is, like, I'm not naturally collaborative, but
I will say, I'll answer. I have many answers to this, truly, but only because I'm currently reading one of his books. I feel like I'm going to say two answers, actually. Grady Hendrix, who, like, My Best Friend's Exorcism is one of the top books that I've read in the past few years. And now I'm reading the rest of his oeuvre. And I feel like I really connect with the stories he's telling and the way he's telling them.
I can't believe you said a man. I am shocked.
Me too. I know. Me too. But I will say the woman that I would connect with, and again, there's so many of them. Oh gosh, I'm even going to change my mind now. No. Okay. I'm going to say it. Nova Rensuma, who I think is just an absolutely outstanding writer. I think we have some similarities in the lyricism of our writing and the very slightly mystical ways that she tells stories. I love all of her work, and so that would be a dream collaboration as well.
That would be very cool. That would actually be really cool.
All right, stop procrastinating. Your turn.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna say, you know what? I'm gonna say Libba Bray. We have in the past discussed the possibility very briefly, and I think that would be a lot of fun to put something together with Libba. I think she'd probably drive me crazy, to be honest with you, because I get incredibly focused and she does not, and so I think that would be interesting, but I think it would be fun to do something like that.
You guys have done videos together, and they're always very. You and Libba have a really good energy between you.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of fun together, and like when she doesn't live on the East Coast anymore, but when she did, and when we used to get together to write together, it was always a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. We'd help each other out with little plot problems and things like that. So that was always good. We approach writing from very different perspectives. She sort of has this gonzo perspective that she comes into it from, and I have this sort of methodical perspective. So I think the actual work would drive us both crazy, but I think the result would be really cool. So, yeah.
Is there anything you guys are working on now, either together or separately, that you can talk about?
We're not currently working on anything together, although we have tried over the past couple of years with a couple of, well, really only one project. Just haven't made much headway on. But can you, I was going to talk about a short story that I just recently turned in for an anthology.
Oh, I mean, okay, yeah. I'm editing an anthology that'll be out sometime next year, and Morgan has a story in it. So yeah.
Yeah, but meanwhile,
that's sort of a collaboration.
Well, yeah, so that's kind of a collaboration for sure.
Yeah.
And then solo, I am working on a separate YA, sort of a rom-com, and that's it for me. Bear?
I'm actually right now not working on anything. I'm taking a little break, but I've got this crazy spy thriller thing that I'm noodling around with, that Morgan read the first 50 pages and really liked it, which encouraged me to keep working on it, because I wasn't 100% sure if it was working. And then the fact that she really liked it, I was like, oh, okay, there's something there. So yeah.
And I will say, I think, we haven't touched upon this yet, but the other amazing thing about having a collaborator who is such a close partner, both artistically and just logistically, is that we swap pages on our unrelated separate work constantly. And it is such a joy to be able to do that. It's like we have a built-in writing group that—
I was gonna say, it's like a writing workshop in the house all the time.
Yeah, we don't need to schedule meetings. I don't need to, bring cupcakes over to someone's house. We're just in the same house. And when on the regular, I will be like, hey, I have this idea. Can you talk it through with me? And then I advance my idea. And he sends me the 4 different, because he's always working on 4 different projects, 4 different things he's working on. He's like, tell me which one to work on. So it's this really perpetual give and take in this really delightful way.
Yeah.
So we have just a few minutes left.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you feel like we should cover, or if maybe you just want to give a 1 minute, this is, if you want to be a writer or work with a partner, this is what you need to know, spiel.
If you want to work with a partner, you've got to, you don't have to eliminate your ego, but you have to be able to control it. Which can be a difficult thing, because, writers put words down on paper because they have enough of an ego to think other people want to read them. And there's a balance to find there between, I'm putting these words down, and yet I'm willing to let somebody else, massage those words. And so the key word really is flexibility. You've got to be flexible, which is not always the easiest thing for me. And certainly working with Morgan on the Hive was a wonderful experience. If you want to be a writer, I always tell people, the problem with writing is that because the physical act of writing is simple, people think it's easy. Writing is just doing this over and over and over again all day long. And it just seems very easy. But it's like anything else, where you have to practice, you have to work at it. If you want to be a rock star, you got to practice guitar. If you want to be a great baseball player, you got to practice your hitting. It's like anything else. Don't lull yourself into thinking there's anything special about it. There isn't. You got to work at it and practice.
And I would say the same about partnerships too. You have to practice being a good partner.
That's true.
You might need to set ground rules, whether you're consciously setting them and writing them down, or just internally thinking, oh, it's about keeping my ego in check. It's about acknowledging and understanding that we're all always reaching for the same goal. And so that makes a true partnership too, and that trust and that respect, and really understanding that everyone, again, brings their own perspectives and expertise and ideas to the table. And even if they're not right for maybe the particular project you're working on, that doesn't mean they're bad. And that doesn't mean you're a bad writer or a bad partner. It just means, you know, you have to figure out ways to set aside things that are for future projects or for different projects, and be okay with that.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you guys again so much for taking the time this morning to talk to us. And for those of you who are watching, make sure that you check out the other panels that our authors are hosting. Barry and Morgan will also both be doing a panel later together about their high school, how their high school experience has impacted their writing. And they are both also on 2 of their own panels. So there are many more opportunities to see these amazing authors as well as many others. So thank you so much for tuning in, and take a short break, go to the bathroom, get some more snacks, and come back at noon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. This is great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.